This king believed one touch would shatter him to pieces, so he had iron rods sewn into his clothes and forbade anyone to come near, not his servants, not his children, not even his wife, who he swore he had never met. For 30 years, France was ruled by a man who thought he was made of glass. People called it a curse, a punishment from God, but the truth was hiding in his blood, and it had already chosen who would break next. The blood that broke two kings. Charles took the throne of France in 1380 at 11 years old. For a while, people loved him. They called him Charles the Beloved. Then, in the summer of 1392, something snapped. While riding out with his army, he drew his sword and killed 4 of his own knights before anyone could stop him. He did not know their faces. He did not know his own. After that day, the king was never the same. He had long stretches where he seemed fine, then weeks where he did not know who he was. He refused to wash for 5 months, until his skin was covered in sores. He denied that he had a wife or any children, and he became sure of one terrible thing. He was made of glass. He had iron rods sewn into his clothing so he would not crack. He sat still for hours, too scared to move. One bump, he believed, and he would smash like a dropped cup. Doctors today call this the glass delusion. It is exactly what it sounds like. The person becomes sure that part of their body, or all of it, is made of glass and could shatter at any second. Think of how you would cross a frozen lake, certain the ice could break under one wrong step. Now imagine feeling that way about your own arms. And here's the strange part. Charles was not the only one. Across Europe, historians have found around 46 cases of the glass delusion, almost all of them in royal and noble families. The sickness seemed to follow a certain kind of blood. The reason traces back to how Charles was made. His mother and father, Joanna and Charles V, were cousins who needed the Pope's permission to marry, because their blood was already so close. This was normal for kings. Marrying outside the family meant handing power to strangers, so crowns married crowns, and cousins married cousins, again and again. But blood remembers. When two people who share a family have a child, they also share the hidden flaws buried deep inside them. Every person carries a few broken pieces in their code, quiet and harmless on their own. It takes 2 matching pieces to do damage. Strangers almost never carry the same ones. Family often does. Picture shuffling a deck that is missing half its cards. The same few keep turning up. Marry close once, and a weakness might double. Do it for generations, and it stops being chance. Charles's own mother was not well. She suffered her own breaks and dark spells long before he was born. Several of her babies died young. The cracks were already in the family. Charles was simply the one they ran through the most. For 30 years he ruled like this. A glass king on a shaking throne. Nobles fought in the streets while he stared at nothing. And all the while his blood was passing on, looking for somewhere new to land. It found England. Charles had a daughter, Catherine. She married the King of England, and they had a son, Henry VI. In 1453, Henry was a grown man on his own throne when his mind simply switched off. He fell into a silence that lasted over a year. He could not speak. He could not move on his own. When his only son was born, he did not react at all, as if the news never reached him. Most historians believe Henry did not break by accident. They say he carried it down from his grandfather, the Glass King, through his mother. The same blood that broke a king in France crossed the sea and broke a king in England. And when Henry's mind went dark, England went with it. His silence left a hole where a ruler should be, and the great families turned on each other to fill it. The war that followed would last 30 years and kill thousands, all of it spilling out from a throne left empty by a mind that no longer worked. The war that one broken mind began. Henry came back. Around the start of 1455, after more than a year lost inside his own head, the fog began to lift. He looked up. He spoke. He slowly came back to himself near Christmas of 1454, and one of the first things he saw was a baby he did not know. The baby was his own son, Edward. The boy had been born while the king's mind was switched off. Henry had not reacted to the birth at all, and now he met his only heir as if meeting a stranger. But a king who can disappear for a year and a half is a king people stop trusting. While Henry sat silent, someone had to run England. That someone was his cousin, Richard, the Duke of York. York was made Lord Protector and ran the country in the king's place. Henry's wife, Queen Margaret, hated this with everything she had. She believed the power should sit with her and her friends, not with York. So the moment Henry could think and speak again, he pushed York out and handed the crown's power back to his own favorites. Now there were 2 sides, and neither would bend. On one side stood the king and his fierce queen. On the other stood the duke who had ruled the land and did not want to let go. Both men carried royal blood. Both could point to the throne and say it should be theirs, and both had stopped believing that talking would settle anything. It helps to remember the kind of man Henry was. He was gentle and deeply religious, more suited to prayer than to war. He founded great schools that still stand today. He hated bloodshed. And that is the cruel joke of it. The kindest king England ever crowned became the reason for the bloodiest fight it had seen in living memory, not through anything he did, but through the sickness in his head that no one could heal. In 1455, the talking ended and the swords came out. The fight grew into a long civil war that history remembers as the Wars of the Roses. One side, the House of Lancaster, took the red rose. The other side, the House of York, took the white. It sounds like a story for children. Two pretty flowers at war. The truth was far darker. These were not strangers. They came from the same king, Edward III, only a few branches apart on the same family tree. The same closed family that had married itself for power was now killing itself for power. Henry was no use in any of it. He could not lead men into battle. He drifted in and out of his dark spells, going quiet for weeks, then waking again. His wife moved him around the country like a puppet, using his name and his crown to hold her side together while the man inside the crown came and went. In 1461, the war turned hard against him. York's eldest son won the field, took the throne, and became King Edward IV. Henry was thrown off the throne and, in time, locked away in the Tower of London. For a few years it looked over, then it flipped again. In 1470, one of the most powerful lords in England, the Earl of Warwick, changed sides. He pulled Henry out of his cell and set him back on the throne. People called Warwick the Kingmaker, because his armies could lift a man into a crown or knock him out of one. So Henry was king a second time, blinking and confused, the crown placed back on a head that barely felt it. It did not hold. In 1471, Edward returned with an army and finished the war for good. Henry's only son Edward was killed at the Battle of Tewkesbury. He was a young man, the last hope of the Red Rose. Once the son was dead, there was no longer any reason to keep the old king breathing. That same May, Henry died inside the Tower of London. The official story was that he died of pure sadness. Almost no one believed it. Most people were sure he was killed in the dark, on the orders of the man who wanted the throne to himself. Stop and think about what was lost. Henry was born to rule. As a baby, he was already king of two great countries. He was meant to pass his crown to his son, and his son to a grandson, on and on down the years. Instead, the whole line he came from ended with him in a cold stone room. The war that his broken mind helped to start ran for about 30 years and killed thousands of people. Old families were wiped from the earth. Many of the lords who began the fight were long buried before it was done, replaced by sons who then died in the same quarrel. And here is the piece that should stay with you. The thing that broke the king and the thing that broke the kingdom were one and the same. Henry's mind cracked because of blood kept too close, carried down to him from the Glass King of France. And the war that swallowed England was blood kept too close as well. Cousins cutting down cousins to decide who owned the family crown. The sickness in the one man and the sickness in the whole country grew from a single root. A family that marries only itself does not simply make broken children. It makes a broken throne, and the whole land bleeds to hold it up. You might think France and England were as bad as this could get. A king who believed he was made of glass. A king whose mind went dark for a year. A war that ate a country from the inside. Surely nothing could be worse. Something was. Far to the south, in Spain, there lived a family that did not fall into this by accident at all. They did it on purpose. They did it for 200 years, and they were proud of it. They took the marrying of their own blood and turned it into a plan, written down and followed like a rule. The Glass King's curse came from a careless match. What came next came from a choice. The family that married itself. Their name was Habsburg. For hundreds of years, they were the most powerful family in Europe. They ruled Austria for century after century, and through clever marriages, they spread their crowns far past it, into Spain, into Bohemia and Hungary, into the rich lands of the Netherlands, and across the sea into a new world they had only just found. Their empire grew so wide that people said the sun never set on it. Somewhere in their lands, it was always day. Most great families won their power with war. The Habsburgs had a different weapon. They won theirs with weddings. Let other kings fight and bleed for land, the family liked to say. You, lucky Austria, marry instead. A daughter sent to the right altar could win a kingdom without a single sword being drawn. For a long time, it was the smartest plan in Europe. While other royal houses wore themselves down in battle, the Habsburgs simply married more crowns onto their heads and grew quietly into the largest power on the map. But weddings came with a problem. If you marry your daughter to a foreign prince, one day a foreign family might own your crown. The whole point was to keep power inside the family, not hand it to outsiders. So the Habsburgs found a simple answer. They married each other. An uncle would wed his own niece. Cousins would wed cousins. A man would marry a woman who was already by blood half his own family. They did this again and again and again, on purpose to keep every crown safely at home. The Spanish branch of the family began in 1516. It started when Philip I married a Spanish princess named Joanna. History gave her a sad nickname, They called her Joanna the Mad. Her mind too was not well, and she sank into long dark years of grief and confusion. So right at the root of this Spanish family tree sat the same shadow that haunted the Glass King of France. Broken minds were there from the very first branch. Then the folding began. Picture a normal family tree. You have 2 parents, they have 4 parents, your grandparents. Those have 8, and so on. The numbers doubling as you climb, spreading wider and wider into a great crowd of ancestors. That is how it should look. Now picture what happens when cousins keep marrying cousins. The tree stops spreading. It starts folding back onto itself. The same few people show up over and over in different spots. A person who should have had a wide crowd of separate ancestors instead has the same small handful of names repeating, because the family kept marrying its own. The more this happens, the more closed the bloodline becomes. You could see the folding on their faces. The Habsburgs carried a mark so well known that it still wears their name. People call it the Habsburg jaw. The proper name is mandibular prognathism, which only means a lower jaw that juts out far past the upper one. With it came a heavy hanging lower lip and a long drooping face. Look at their portraits, painted over 200 years, and you see the same jaw staring back from king after king and queen after queen, like one face wearing many crowns. And the jaw was not just an ugly chin. For some of them it was so heavy that the top and bottom teeth would not meet. That made it hard to bite, hard to chew, hard even to speak clearly. The mark of the bloodline was not only something to look at, it was something they had to live inside, every single day, at every meal and every word. This was not a guess. In 2019, scientists tested it properly. They gathered 66 painted portraits of 15 Habsburg royals, and they asked 10 jaw and face surgeons to study each one and score how strong that famous jaw was. Then they measured how closely each royal's parents were related. The 2 lined up almost perfectly. The more inbred the Habsburg, the more pronounced the jaw. The mark on the face was the family's hidden choice made plain for anyone to see, and the jaw was only the part you could see. It was the smallest sign of what was happening underneath. Remember how the Glass King story put it. Every person carries a few broken pieces in their code, quiet and harmless on their own. It takes 2 matching pieces to do damage, and strangers almost never carry the same ones. Family often does. Every time 2 close cousins had a child, they stacked up more of those hidden broken pieces deep in the blood, the kind that do not show in a portrait. The face was the warning written on the outside. The real damage was being saved up on the inside, growing heavier with every wedding waiting. It all came to rest in one child. He was born in the autumn of 1661 into the most powerful family in the world, the heir to an empire where the sun never set. He had every crown a person could want and almost nothing a body needs. He would carry in one small frame the full weight of 200 years of marrying within the blood, and he would be the last of his name. The last of his name. His name was Charles II of Spain. He was born on the 6th of November, 1661 in Madrid, and from his first breath, he was the most carefully bred and most badly broken king Europe had ever produced. His own mother and father were uncle and niece, not distant cousins. Uncle and niece, close family, joined to keep the crown in Habsburg hands. Centuries later, scientists put a number on what that blood had become. A team in Spain built the family tree of Charles and traced more than 3,000 of his relatives and ancestors back across 16 generations. For each one, they worked out a score that measures how closely a person's parents were related, how much of their blood was folded back on itself. At the start of the Spanish line, Philip I scored about 0.25, a low and ordinary number. By the time you reach Charles, the score had climbed to 0.254, 10 times higher. Hold on to that number, because it is hard to believe. A child born to a brother and a sister, or to a parent and their own child, would score about 0.25. Charles scored higher than that. His parents were only uncle and niece, yet his blood was as folded as if his parents had been the very closest family there is, because the same few ancestors had been married back into the line so many times that they piled up inside him. And his body told the whole story without a single word. He did not speak until he was 4 years old. He did not walk until he was 8. The famous Habsburg jaw sat on him so heavily that his teeth would not meet, so he could barely chew his food. His tongue was too large for his mouth, so the words he did learn came out thick and hard to follow, and he drooled. He had seizures. He was sick again and again. He was weak and small and could not father a child. His father died when Charles was only 3 years old, and so this frail little boy became king of Spain before he could walk or speak. The real ruling was done by his mother and her advisors, while the child king grew up slowly in poor health, deep inside a court that watched him with worry and waited to see if he would even live. So the people did the same thing the French had done with the Glass King 300 years before. They reached for a curse. They gave Charles a nickname, El Hechicero, which means the bewitched. They were sure some spell or some devil had reached into his cradle and ruined him. priests were brought in to perform exorcisms, to drive out whatever dark thing had cursed their king. Charles believed it about himself too. He went to confessors and friars, begging them to find the evil in his soul and pull it out. But there was no spell, there was no devil in the cradle. There was only blood kept too close, the same hidden flaws that had been doubling inside his family for 200 years, finally all landing in one boy at once. The crown had one true job for him, and it was the one job his body could not do. A king is meant to make an heir, a son to take the throne next. Charles married twice, and both marriages gave him no children. The most powerful man in the world, owner of half the map, could not do the one thing every farmer and beggar could do. He could not pass on his name. Each childless year deepened the whispers that he truly was cursed, and the search for a cure grew more frantic and more strange. He spent his last years sick, frightened, and certain that his death would tear his kingdom apart. He was right on the first day of November, 1700, a few days short of his 39th birthday. Charles II died. The grim story passed down afterwards said that when his body was opened, it held barely any blood at all. His insides were ruined, and his head was full of water. Whether every detail is true or not, it was the kind of story a frightened people tell about a king they always believed was broken from the start. And with him, the Spanish Habsburg line that had ruled for almost 200 years came to an end. There was no son, there was no heir of his blood anywhere. The folding had folded all the way down to nothing. So in his will, the last sick king gave his vast empire away to a prince from another country. He left the Spanish crown to Philip of Anjou, a French prince of the Bourbon family. A boy from outside the blood would now wear the crown the Habsburgs had married themselves to death trying to keep. Europe would not take it quietly. A crown that rich, suddenly handed off with no heir to fight for it, was a prize too large to ignore. Kings looked at the empty Spanish throne and reached for their swords. The empty cradle of one bewitched king was about to set the whole continent on fire. The curse was never a curse. The war came fast, Charles dying with no heir threw Europe into the War of the Spanish Succession, a fight over who would take the giant prize he left behind. It was fought across Spain, Italy, Germany, and Holland, and out at sea so wide that some call it the First World War of the modern age. Hundreds of thousands of people died in it. Every one of those deaths traces back, in the end, to a single broken king who could not have a child. A family had married its own blood to hold its power, and that same blood took the power away, then drowned a continent in war to decide who got it next. So now look at the whole long story laid side by side. A king in France who thought he was made of glass. His grandson in England whose mind switched off for a year and lit a 30-year war. A king in Spain so ruined by his own bloodline that the world fought over his empty throne. 3 countries, 300 years. People in every one of them said the same thing. A curse, a spell, the hand of God reaching down to punish a king. It was none of those things, it was math. Here is the plain truth under all of it. You carry 2 copies of nearly every gene, one from your mother and one from your father. Some of those copies are broken, but usually the second working copy quietly covers for the broken one, and you never even know it is there. A stranger almost never carries the same broken copies you do. But family does. The closer the family, the more broken copies you share. Marry close, and your child can be handed 2 broken copies of the same gene with no working one to cover. That is the whole curse. No devil, no spell. Just 2 matching broken pieces finding each other the way they almost never can unless the same blood is folded back on itself. Think again of a deck of cards missing half its cards. Shuffle a full deck and you rarely draw 2 of the same. But shuffle a deck where the same few cards keep repeating, and soon you draw a matching pair, then another, then another. That was the Habsburg family tree. They kept folding the same cards back in until the matches were almost certain. Charles II was the hand they finally drew. And here is the part that should chill you. This was never only the Habsburgs. The same trap waited for any family that married its own. The proof came again much later in the most famous royal family of them all. Queen Victoria of England carried a broken gene of her own. It caused a sickness called hemophilia, soon known as the royal disease. It is a fault that stops blood from clotting, so a small cut or a hard knock can bleed and bleed for days and turn deadly. The fault sits on a part of the blood's instructions that mostly strikes boys, while girls carry it silently and pass it on without ever falling ill. Victoria carried it silently. She never knew. Then her many children married into the royal houses of Europe, into Germany, into Russia, into Spain, and the broken gene rode along with them, spreading the royal disease across the thrones of the continent. Her own son Leopold died at 31, bleeding inside his head after a fall. The cruelest case was in Russia. Victoria's great-grandson Alexei, the only son and heir to the Russian throne, was born with the disease. A small bruise could leave the little prince in agony for days. His desperate mother turned to a strange holy man named Rasputin, who seemed, somehow, to calm the boy's bleeding. Rasputin's grip on the royal family helped rot it from the inside, and that rot was one of the cracks that brought the whole Russian throne crashing down. The family was shot in a cellar in 1918. Years later, in 2009, scientists tested the bones from their grave and proved at last that the royal disease in their blood was hemophilia. In Spain, Victoria's granddaughter Ana married the Spanish king, Alfonso XIII, and carried the same broken gene into yet another royal house. Their son and heir died at 31, bleeding to death after a car crash. Do you see the shape of it? One hidden flaw passed quietly through marriages between cousins and crowns, knocking over throne after throne in country after country. It is the exact same shape as the Glass King's curse, only the broken gene is different. The lesson is the same one, taught over and over for 500 years and never learned in time. And what finally broke the curse? Not medicine, not prayer, not exorcism. The cure was the one thing every one of these families had spent centuries refusing to do. They let strangers in. The story of the Glass King said it plainly long ago. Marrying outside the family meant handing power to strangers. So crowns married crowns and cousins married cousins. That fear of the stranger was the whole disease. The moment royal families stopped marrying their own and began marrying fresh blood from outside, the broken pieces stopped finding their matches. Today, there is no living royal descendant known to carry the royal disease. The cracks did not close with a cure. They closed because someone new was finally let in, which brings us back to the Glass King on his shaking throne. Charles VI of France was wrong about the glass. One touch was never going to shatter him, but he was right about the deeper thing, more right than he could ever have known. Something inside him truly could break, and it would not stay inside him. It slipped down through his daughter, crossed the sea, and broke a king in England. In its other forms, it folded down through Spain and snuffed out a whole dynasty. It rode through Victoria's children and toppled the throne of Russia. For 500 years, the most powerful families on earth looked at this breaking and called it a curse from God. It was never a curse. It was their own blood, held too close for too long remembering, and the only thing that ever broke it was opening the door and letting a stranger walk in.